Picture tomorrow morning, you step outside, maybe it is 7 a.m., maybe it is later, and you start walking, nothing dramatic, no watch buzzing, no playlist of intervals, just one foot in front of the other, and somewhere in that plain unremarkable motion, something ancient switches on inside your body, a sequence that was written into your skeleton, your heart, your brain, and your metabolism, long before treadmills, long before marathons, long before anyone ever called exercise a hobby. Because walking is not a workout you chose, it is the operating mode your entire physiology was engineered around. And by the end of this, you are going to understand exactly why your body responds to walking the way nothing else in the fitness world can replicate, not because someone told you so, but because you will see the mechanism yourself, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Before we go further, if you find this kind of deep mechanism-first explanation useful, that is exactly what this channel is built around. So consider staying with smart psychology for the rest of this one, because the second half changes how you will think about every gym session you have ever done. Let us start with the body you actually have, not the body fitness marketing assumes you have. Around 6 million years ago, a slow structural transformation began in our ancestors. The pelvis narrowed and reshaped. The femur angled inward toward the knee. The arches of the foot developed as natural springs. The big toe aligned forward instead of splaying sideways like other primates. And the entire skeleton from spine to heel reorganized itself around one specific talent, covering long distances on two legs without wasting energy. This is called obligate bipedalism, and it is one of the defining features that separates humans from every other primate on the planet. Chimpanzees can stand upright for short bursts, but it costs them enormously. Human walking, by contrast, is astonishingly cheap. Researchers who study locomotion energetics have shown that walking at a natural pace costs the human body only a fraction of the calories per mile that running or high-intensity movement demands, because the mechanics of the human gait were shaped by natural selection to minimize waste. Your hips swing, your arms counter-rotate, your Achilles tendon stores and releases energy like a spring, and your body converts forward motion into a rhythm that requires very little conscious effort once you learn to walk as a toddler. Anthropological estimates of hunter-gatherer movement patterns, drawn from both historical accounts and modern populations that still live traditional lifestyles, such as the Hadza of Tanzania, suggest that our ancestors covered somewhere between 9 and 15 kilometers on a typical day, not in a single dedicated session, but spread across the day as part of foraging, gathering, tracking, and simply moving from one place to another. This was not exercise in the modern sense. It was logistics, it was how food got found and how life got lived, and your genome, your cardiovascular system, your joints, and your muscular structure were calibrated against that daily baseline for hundreds of thousands of years, which is a time scale so much longer than the roughly 1 century we have spent designing chairs, cars, elevators, and desk jobs that your biology has had essentially no time to adjust to a sedentary default. Now let us go inside the actual physiology, because this is where walking stops being a lifestyle suggestion and starts being a biological requirement. When you walk, your calf muscles contract rhythmically with every step, and this is not incidental. Your calves are sometimes called the second heart, because the veins in your legs rely heavily on the squeezing action of surrounding muscle to push blood back up toward your heart against gravity. This is called the skeletal muscle pump. And without it functioning regularly, blood and fluid pool in your lower legs, pressure builds in the venous system, and over years this contributes to varicose veins, swelling, and reduced circulatory efficiency. Walking, performed simply and repeatedly, activates this pump every single time you take a step, which is something sitting for 8 or 10 hours a day does not do, no matter how intensely you train for 45 minutes at the gym afterward. Walking also has a distinct effect on your nervous system that high-intensity exercise does not replicate in the same way. Steady rhythmic movement activates what is called the parasympathetic branch of your autonomic nervous system, the rest and digest branch, at the same time that it mildly elevates heart rate and circulation. This combination is unusual. Most forms of intense exercise push you firmly into a sympathetic, fight-or-flight dominant state, which is useful for building power and speed, but which also elevates cortisol substantially for the following hour or more. Walking at a moderate conversational pace does not spike cortisol the same way. In fact, multiple physiological studies on movement and stress hormones show that low to moderate intensity walking tends to lower circulating cortisol over time when done consistently, particularly when it happens outdoors in natural light, which adds a circadian regulation effect on top of the muscular one. This is also where I want to bring in something practical, because understanding a mechanism only matters if you actually use it. So here is a concrete way to apply what we just covered. Take the very first work call of your day, the one you would normally take sitting at a desk, and take it while walking instead, outdoors if the weather allows it. This single substitution costs you nothing, adds no extra time to your day, and quietly delivers the skeletal muscle pump activation, the parasympathetic shift, and the natural light exposure we just discussed, all inside a habit you already have. Your spine benefits from walking in a way that is easy to overlook, because it happens quietly in the background of every step. Between each vertebra sits a disc made mostly of water and collagen, and like cartilage, these discs do not have a direct blood supply either. They rely on a pumping action created by gentle compression, and release to draw in fluid and nutrients and push out metabolic waste. Sitting for long stretches compresses these discs continuously, without the alternating release that keeps them healthy. Walking restores that rhythm with every stride, the mild rotation of your torso, the counter swing of your arms, and the repeated loading and unloading of your lower spine all combine to keep those discs hydrated and functioning, which is one reason people who sit most of the day, but walk regularly during breaks, so often report less lower back stiffness than people who sit the same number of hours without ever standing up to move. There is also a longevity signal here worth taking seriously. Large population studies tracking step counts against mortality risk over years of follow-up have consistently found that people who walk more show meaningfully lower rates of death from cardiovascular disease and from causes overall, compared to the most sedentary groups, and this relationship holds even after researchers statistically account for other factors like body weight, smoking status, and existing illness. One widely cited analysis following thousands of older adults found that even modest increases in daily steps, well below what most people would consider serious exercise, were associated with meaningfully lower mortality over the following years. The researchers were careful to note, this is an association rather than absolute proof of cause, but the consistency of the pattern across many independent studies, in many different countries, makes it one of the more reliable findings in all of preventive health research. Let us talk about joints, because this is where the difference between walking and higher impact training becomes most obvious in terms of long-term sustainability. Cartilage, the smooth tissue lining the ends of your bones inside a joint, does not have its own direct blood supply. It receives nutrients through a process of compression and release, meaning cartilage is fed when it is loaded, and then unloaded rhythmically. Walking applies exactly this kind of gentle, repeated, low-impact loading, which orthopedic researchers have described as one of the few movements that nourishes cartilage without accelerating its breakdown. Running, jumping, and heavy resistance training all have their place and their benefits, but they load joints with forces many times higher than walking does with every strike. Walking, by contrast, applies roughly 1 to 1.5 times body weight through the joint with each step, which is gentle enough to sustain daily for decades, without the wear pattern associated with higher impact repetitive training. There is also a metabolic story here that most people never hear. Your skeletal muscles contain transport proteins called GLUT4 receptors, and when muscles contract, these receptors move to the cell surface and pull glucose out of your bloodstream without needing much insulin at all. This is called insulin-independent glucose uptake, and it means that even a 15 or 20-minute walk after a meal can measurably blunt the blood sugar spike that would otherwise follow. Several clinical studies looking at postprandial glucose have found that a short walk taken shortly after eating reduces the glucose spike more effectively, minute for minute, than a longer but delayed bout of exercise taken hours later. This is a very specific, very practical mechanism. Your muscles are asking for the glucose the moment they contract, and walking after meals is one of the simplest ways to give your metabolism exactly what it is designed to receive. Your lymphatic system deserves mention here too, because unlike your circulatory system, your lymphatic system has no central pump, no equivalent of the heart. It depends almost entirely on muscle contraction, and changes in pressure from movement and breathing to circulate lymph fluid and clear waste products and immune cells through your tissues. A sedentary day, even one broken up by a single gym session, leaves your lymphatic system underused for the majority of your waking hours. Walking, spread naturally across a day, keeps that fluid moving continuously, which is part of why people who build regular walking into their day so often describe feeling less puffy, less stiff, and less foggy, compared to people who exercise hard once and then sit still for the remaining 16 hours. There is a cellular level story here too. Inside almost every one of your muscle cells sit mitochondria, the structures responsible for converting fuel into usable energy. And mitochondria respond directly to regular, moderate movement by increasing in number and improving their efficiency, a process researchers call mitochondrial biogenesis. This does not require exhausting effort. It responds well to consistent, moderate, low-intensity movement sustained over weeks and months, which is exactly the profile that walking provides. More efficient mitochondria mean your cells can produce energy with less oxidative stress and less waste byproduct, which has downstream effects on fatigue, on recovery, and on how resilient your tissues are as you age. Walking, done daily, is quietly training this cellular machinery in the background of an activity that most people do not even categorize as exercise. Breathing pattern shifts during walking in a way that also supports this cellular process. Your breathing rate increases mildly and rhythmically, pulling in more oxygen and improving the efficiency of gas exchange in your lungs without pushing you into the labored, ragged breathing associated with high-intensity effort. This steady increase in oxygen delivery, paired with the improved circulation from the muscle pump we discussed earlier, means that walking delivers oxygen to tissues throughout your body more consistently across the day than a single intense session followed by hours of stillness ever could. Your body was not built to hold its breath at a desk for 9 hours and then gasp through a 40-minute workout. It was built to move and breathe a little harder, gently and continuously, throughout the day. Now, for something that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it, walking measurably changes creative thinking. Researchers at Stanford University conducted a series of experiments comparing divergent thinking, the kind of thinking involved in generating new ideas, in people who were sitting versus people who were walking, and they found that walking, including walking on a treadmill facing a blank wall, increased creative output by a substantial margin compared to sitting. And the effect persisted for a short period even after the person sat back down, an effect the researchers had not fully expected going into the experiment. The researchers proposed that the rhythmic, bilateral nature of walking, combined with the mild increase in blood flow and arousal it produces, puts the brain into a state that is unusually favorable for making unexpected connections between ideas. This is very different from the mental state produced by high-intensity training, which tends to demand so much attention and physical effort that it leaves little cognitive space free for wandering, associative thought. There is a hormonal side to brain health here as well. Moderate rhythmic movement like walking increases levels of a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, often abbreviated as BDNF, which supports the growth of new neurons and strengthens connections between existing ones, particularly in the hippocampus, the brain region most associated with memory formation. Researchers studying aging populations have repeatedly found that people who maintain regular walking habits show slower rates of hippocampal volume loss over the years compared to sedentary peers of the same age. This is not a small cosmetic effect. Hippocampal volume is directly linked to memory performance later in life, and walking appears to be one of the most accessible, lowest-cost interventions available for supporting it. If any of this is landing for you, this is a good moment to actually commit to something concrete rather than just nodding along. Pick one specific walk you will take today. Right after this video ends, even 10 minutes counts, because the research we just covered was not measuring people who walk occasionally when motivated. It was measuring the only variable that actually produces these results. And consistency actually produces these results. Let us also address the modern fitness culture directly, because I think it has quietly convinced an entire generation that movement only counts if it hurts. If you leave feeling depleted, soaked in sweat, unable to walk downstairs the next day, that is one kind of adaptation, useful for specific goals like building strength or speed, but it is not the daily baseline your body was designed to run on. Our ancestors were not doing maximal effort training 5 days a week. They were walking, carrying, bending, and moving at low to moderate intensity almost constantly, punctuated occasionally by short bursts of high effort like a sprint away from danger or a burst of climbing. This pattern, long, steady, low-intensity movement with occasional brief spikes, is closer to your actual design specification than the modern gym model of short, brutal, and infrequent high-intensity interval training has real benefits in a real place. But it was never meant to be the only form of movement in your week, and for most people trying to replace daily walking entirely with occasional intense workouts, the mismatch shows up as joint pain, chronic fatigue, elevated resting cortisol, and a body that never quite recovers between sessions. Researchers studying sedentary behavior have described a pattern sometimes called active couch potato syndrome, referring to people who technically meet exercise guidelines through a single scheduled workout, but then spend the remaining 16 or so waking hours sitting almost continuously. And the data on this group is sobering. The metabolic and cardiovascular benefits of that one workout appear to be substantially blunted by the surrounding hours of stillness. The muscle pump goes quiet, the lymphatic flow slows, insulin sensitivity in the muscles declines, and the body spends most of its day in a state that looks, physiologically, closer to sleep than to the active foraging existence it was designed for. Walking breaks scattered through the day, even brief ones of a few minutes taken every hour, have been shown in several studies to counteract a meaningful portion of these effects, which suggests that frequency and distribution of movement across the day matters just as much as the single hardest session you complete in a week. There is also something worth saying about dose, because people often assume more must be better, and walking does not really work that way. Researchers tracking step counts and health outcomes across large populations have found that benefits rise steeply, up to around 7,000 to 8,000 steps a day, and then the curve flattens considerably beyond that point, meaning the jump from being sedentary to moderately active produces a much larger improvement in outcomes than the jump from moderately active to extremely active. This is good news practically, because it means you do not need to walk marathons to capture most of the benefit. You need to walk consistently, at a pace where you could hold a conversation, but would not want to sing, ideally outdoors. Ideally broken into a few separate walks across the day, rather than one single block, because spreading movement across your waking hours appears to matter almost as much as the total volume. Timing also interacts with some of what we discussed earlier. Walking shortly after a meal blunts glucose spikes. Walking in the morning under natural daylight helps anchor your circadian rhythm alongside your cortisol awakening response. And walking in the evening, at a gentle pace, has been shown in several studies to improve sleep onset and sleep quality that same night, likely through the combined effect of lowered cortisol, increased core body temperature that then drops afterward, promoting sleepiness, and reduced mental arousal compared to screen-based evening habits. In other words, walking is one of the very few interventions that pays a dividend, no matter which part of the day you place it in, morning, midday, or evening. Each timing slot offers a slightly different but genuinely useful benefit. It is also worth saying that walking does not require ideal conditions to count. You do not need a scenic trail, perfect weather, or a dedicated block of free time carved out of an already full schedule. A walk around the block during a lunch break, a walk to a coffee shop instead of driving, a walk while catching up with a friend on the phone, all of these count fully toward the physiological effects we have covered. And there is a social layer here too. Walking alongside another person, whether a friend, a partner, or a coworker, tends to make the habit easier to sustain over months and years compared to walking alone, simply because shared plans are harder to cancel than solo ones, and the conversation that happens during a walk often feels easier and less confrontational than the same conversation held sitting face to face, which is one more quiet advantage layered on top of everything already discussed. So here is what all of this adds up to. Your skeleton was shaped over millions of years to walk efficiently. Your cardiovascular system depends on the muscle pump in your calves to move blood properly. Your lymphatic system depends on movement, because it has no pump of its own. Your joints are nourished by the gentle repeated loading that walking provides. Your metabolism responds to muscle contraction by pulling glucose out of your blood without demanding much insulin. Your brain produces more creative output and more protective neurotrophic factors when you walk regularly, and your stress hormones settle, rather than spike when movement stays in this steady, moderate zone. None of this requires equipment, a gym membership, or a training program. It requires putting one foot in front of the other, regularly, for the rest of your life, which is precisely the plan your body has been running on since long before anyone invented a treadmill. Before you go, if this changed how you think about your own routine even slightly, the most useful thing you can do right now is decide on one walk you will take today, not someday, today. And if you want more of this kind of biology-first breakdown of things you already do every day, that is what smart psychology is here for. So stay close, because tomorrow morning, when you are deciding what to do with your body before anything else, remember that 6 million years of design already answered the question for you. All that is left is to actually walk, not as a punishment for what you ate, not as a box to check before you feel allowed to rest, but as the plain, steady, ordinary act your entire body has been quietly asking for since the very first morning you stood up on two legs.